Thank you for coming. For those who don't know me, I'm Larry Paul. I'm a lifelong car enthusiast. I built many cars, including magazine-published and award-winning muscle cars, and as well as for fun, I've driven in autocross and road racing and drag racing events on racetracks. Electric car concepts started to intrigue me as far back as 40 years ago, but it was literally the first few seconds of my test drive of a GM EV1 in late 1996 that I instantly knew my life had changed. I knew, like a light switch being flipped, that electric cars were not only my future, they were also the future. Although my wife and I did not end up leasing an EV1, as a two-seat lease-only sports car was not ideal since we just got married, we're going to have kind of a family. But a couple years later, we did lease a Honda four-seat EV Plus after a 5-month wait after being approved almost 28 years ago. Ever since, my wife and I have been driving factory-produced freeway-capable EVs and have been very involved in the EV community, essentially for the same time. While there were EVs in the late 1800s to the 1920s, and GM built 5 notable electric-powered concept vehicles in the 1960s, in today's presentation, I'm really going to focus exclusively on the development of the modern production EV. You know, the catalyst for the modern EV started here. That's when GM participated in the world's first solar challenge that was held in December of 1987 in Australia. Collaborating with Aero Environment, the Sunraycer was designed, tested, and completed in just 10 months. Not only did it win, it finished the race nearly 2 days ahead of its second-place competitor, the Ford Sunchaser. Here's a GM promo ad touting their accomplishment.
We will race 1,900 miles across Australia, powered only by the sun. GM beat Ford and 23 other entries. The GM Sunraycer. Solar technology from GM's Hughes aircraft subsidiary. Drive motor from the GM Research Laboratories. Magnet punch magnets from Delco Remy. Chassis from GM's engineering staffs. A triumph of GM teamwork and technology. The vision is paying off.
So I was truly amazed that a car could drive off of sunlight alone. And that brings us to the concept car of what became the first truly modern electric vehicle, the Impact. The Impact was a flagship project for General Motors, and specifically for General Motors chairman Roger Smith. And here he is making that announcement.
We are extremely pleased this morning to be able to introduce to you project that keeps GM on the cutting edge of technology. It's called Impact, and it's an exciting new electric car, the first one in 10 years. It can go further and faster than any previous production-oriented electric vehicle. It can go from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 8 seconds, and it has all the comforts and convenience of a modern automobile. We've taken a big step, a very big step. We've gone beyond the slow-moving electric delivery trucks and golf carts. Impact is a genuine, full-performance machine with capabilities that rival those of today's internal combustion-powered cars. The Impact, as I said earlier, is an experimental vehicle. It is not now ready for production. On the other hand, it was designed to be producible, and we're now evaluating a business plan to see just how feasible it would be to produce it.
So I was not the only one who was fascinated by the Impact. The California Air Resources Board, also known as CARB, was listening. The GM Impact proved that it was possible to make a fully functional mass production electric vehicle. CARB decided they wanted to encourage all manufacturers to develop battery-powered cars, so they created what's called the ZEV, or Zero Emission Vehicle Battery-Powered EV program. About 6 years later, the MOA became a binding, enforceable contract between California and each of the big 6 manufacturers. They were all compelled to create EVs for California if they wanted to sell any cars in California. So about 6 years later, it had a stated goal of putting as many as 3,750 EVs on California roads beginning in 1998. And by 2010, the target was to have 800,000 EVs on California roads. After the MOA, or the Memorandum of Agreement, all 6 manufacturers stepped up and produced thousands of EVs in the 1996 to 2003 period. The next slides introduce the 7 major vehicles produced during the MOA era. The EV1 featured spaceship kind of future styling and up to 140 miles plus range. It still holds the record for the most aerodynamic production car with a drag coefficient of 0.195. EV1s were available for lease only, but to the public, but some went to fleet customers, and most were delivered to California, but a few went to Arizona. GM installed a slightly detuned EV1 drivetrain, and they made a front-wheel drive Chevy S10 electric pickup. These were fleet lease only, and the vast majority of them were delivered to California, but a few of them also were available in Georgia. This was our first EV, a Honda EV Plus. This one's a 1999, the 98s look the same. About 300 in total were manufactured in California, and I understand about 10 went to New York for cold weather testing. They actually had kerosene heaters to supplement the heat pump. It was the most luxurious of all the EVs back in that era, but it was based on a production car, an internal combustion car in Japan. These were available to the public to lease, but some went to fleet customers also. And Ford leased 1,312 of the Ranger EVs exclusively to fleet customers in California. It was a traditional Ranger pickup, but with an electric drivetrain. Dodge and Plymouth vans were also notable because they were the first vehicle to use DC fast charging, mostly used at airports for shuttles. These were fleet lease only and only delivered in California. All RAV4 EVs used the Gen 1 gas model body. From 1997 to 2001, 949 of them were exclusively sold to leased to fleet customers, the majority in California, but some were delivered in other states, including 2 of them in Oregon for PGE back in the day. This changed in the 2000 to 2003 era when Toyota made just 339 more vehicles, but for the first time, these were available actually to the public. The RAV4 EV was notable because it was the only model of the MOA era that was ever offered new for sale to the public. And we are the original, my wife and I are the original owners of ours today, and it's just one of the 101 ever sold to the public brand new. And you can see it outside. Only 130 of the Nissan Ultra EVs were exclusively leased to customers in California. But it is most notable is the only one of the MOA cars was actually lithium-ion powered back in the day. The Ultra EV was based on a Nissan Arnesa, also a gasoline vehicle that was available in Japan. But what was special about the EV1? Well, just about everything. No major parts on the EV1 were borrowed from other GM vehicles. If you noticed, each one of the other EVs were based on internal combustion vehicles. The EV1 was a purpose-built vehicle that was designed from the ground up to be an ultra-efficient platform. And I call it a platform because there were other variants in the R&D lab, such as the Series hybrid that used a turbine engine connected to a generator to extend the range of the vehicle. The parallel hybrid version actually had a diesel engine that could drive the rear wheels of the vehicle after the battery was drained. And they also developed compressed natural gas and fuel cell versions of the EV1 platform. And GM was also testing what the limits of this new platform were. In March of 1994, a very slightly modified GM Impact with a different final gear ratio, otherwise totally stock, and other small changes established a new land speed record for electric vehicles, establishing 183 miles an hour on the test track. GM was way ahead of every car company with EV technology. In 1994, GM produced 50 of these hand-built Impact prototypes that were loaned to drivers for 1 to 2 weeks in 12 cities all across the United States. For all practical purposes, these were prototype EV1s. And the GM used what they did was years ahead of everyone else in the market. And I followed the GM EV preview program. I never had a chance to drive one though. So how are these production cars used by customers? Well, because they could typically go 2 to 3 times longer than the average person's driving distance, they were used like most cars on the road, commuting to work, taking the kids to school, going to the grocery stores. They were a normal car. Most of these early drivers were very enthusiastic about driving EVs and enjoyed participating in the new EV community. These were great cars to use in cities, but they really weren't practical for road trips. So part of the challenge was the lack of charging standards. You were just talking about that at the previous presentation. But what's different back then, there were 4 different charging standards and they were really mostly incompatible with the others. So if you pulled up to a charger, it would have to be the right one for yours, it would have to be working, and it wouldn't be blocked by another internal combustion engine. So there were a lot of challenges back in the early days. They really weren't they weren't made for road trips. So you'll notice the 2 on the left actually say J1772. That's actually the protocol used, not the physical connector. The connectors are different, but actually I took my old charger from my Honda and I actually modified it with a new plug and it worked fine on the new car too. So it was the same protocol. The other one, J1773, like what I have with our RAV, is induction, which ended up dying. So except for the 207 Epic vans, the maximum charging speed in these cars would get about 20 miles of range for every hour of charging, which was fine for an urban vehicle living in the city. Public charging was limited, and in between cities there were very few chargers, like a few between LA and San Diego, but they were very rare. Made road trips challenging, so most people didn't even try. While EV road trips are not headline news today, there was one truly extraordinary road trip about 28 years ago. In May of 1998, Chris Trexler took nearly a 3,000-mile road trip in his EV1 from LA to GM's headquarters in Detroit, Michigan. This was an impressive feat considering there was no public charging available for the entire journey. He would drive about 60 miles and then he would stop for 3 hours and charge with his level 2 charger. And it took him 3 weeks to get there, but he did make this incredibly epic road trip. And Michael Moore made a film called Roger and Me that came out in 1989. It was very critical of Roger Smith. Roger Smith also stepped down as the chairman of GM 8 months after the GM Impact announcement. And while R&D continued at GM, the new upper management had a very different agenda. They were in court fighting against the MOA, aggressively working to kill the EV program. So how were they marketed? Well, there was very little marketing done for EVs, but when there was, it is unlike anything I've ever seen for a car or about anything else since. I actually think they did more to encourage people not to get an EV than to get an EV. At best, there was little to no effort to tell customers why they should want one. At worst, well, I think you'll see what I mean. Here are 3 commercials from GM for the EV1.
The electric car is here.
So, while it was well produced and kind of fun, but using a power outage to promote an electric vehicle doesn't make a lot of sense. And also, what about the rise of the machines and the lack of people in that commercial? It doesn't make anyone say, yes, I need one of those in my driveway. So here's another one.
Is this what all those science fiction writers had in mind?
The electric car is here.
So in a 30-second spot, the first 20 seconds didn't say anything informative. Matter of fact, didn't say a word at all. And what they did, while they did say it was here, they also linked it to fiction, which implies that it's not real. But it's the next one that is really way out there.
How does it go without gas and air? How does it go without sparks and explosions? How does it go without gears or transmissions? How does it go, you will ask yourself. And then you will ask, how did we go so long without it? The electric car, it isn't coming. It's here.
So with lots of eerie sounds and visuals of a post-nuclear apocalypse that also includes a flash and a boom with the sound of sizzling right near the end of the ad, the message to customers is clearly not that you should want one of these. It's more of the electric car is here. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Here's the take from Toyota.
This car won't help you get a better table at a fancy restaurant. It may not impress your coworkers, and it won't make up for your receding hairline. It has, however, one quality most automobiles can't claim. It will make the world a better place to live in. The zero-emission, pure electric Toyota RAV4 EV, just one of our many environmental solutions.
So while Toyota did a bit better, but talking about your receding hairline and not impressing your coworkers is not anything I've ever heard used to sell a car before. And at least the ending tagline would make the world a better place if you got one. But the commercial is very clear. It is not a sexy car. Said differently, it's not the car you want to get, but it's what you should get. Now go take your cod liver oil and enjoy your gluten-free muffin and kale salad. So, due to litigation led by General Motors in January of 2003, CARB announced a series of, quote, amendments that ended the requirement to have any EVs on the road. And CARB shifted the focus from fuel cells to fuel cells and hybrids. And as soon as the car companies were no longer required to have electric vehicles on the road, they took them off the road when the lease ended. The last of the EV1s was confiscated in late 1994. These EV1s, I took a picture of the top row of them, were gathered at the old GM Van Nuys plant in California before being transported to Mesa, Arizona to be crushed. And it was not just GM. All 6 manufacturers were retrieving their lease cars and sending them to the crusher. But the passionate EV community started to push back on the automakers and the numerous false narratives that were coming out of the automotive industry. They claimed there was no interest when there was long waiting lists for people to try to get one of these cars. And no one ever purchased one. Well, because virtually none were ever offered for sale. They were lease-only vehicles. But the EV community staged media events to bring attention to this story, and including this high-profile event that got news coverage, a funeral for the EV. Unfortunately, it did not stop GM from taking all the EV1s off the road. But a year and a half later, there was some good news. On January 14th, 2005, led by Heather Burnkoff and David Raboy, several Ford Ranger EV drivers and EV supporters began an EV vigil at the Ford dealership in Sacramento to protest Ford Motor Company's confiscation and destruction of the Ford EV pickups. After a week-long truck sit-in event, Ford reversed its decision, and Ford made an amazing offer. After their leases expired, they would offer their vehicles to be purchased by the drivers for $1. And most of the remaining 400 trucks were purchased and then therefore saved from the crusher. The community next set out to get GM to do the same thing. In early 2005, someone discovered 78 EV1s remaining still in a parking lot at the back of a GM training facility in Burbank, California. And starting on February 16th, 2005, a 24-hour EV1 vigil began for what became a very wet February in California to save the last of the EV1s. And we started getting news coverage about these cars. and our $1.9 million offer to purchase these cars with no product liability. Unfortunately, a month later, GM dug their heels in and they called transportation trucks to haul away and destroy the remaining cars. Alexandra Paul, no relation to me, has used her RAV4 to block the truck, and she and Colette Devine were both arrested on March 14th, 2005, trying to prevent the trucks from leaving. Obviously, we were not successful, but more than that, GM had gone from being the hands-down worldwide leader in EV development to not accidentally, but intentionally going out of the way to sabotage and destroy their leadership position. And I'm not saying it was the demise of the EV1 specifically that caused it directly, but it's not lost to me that while GM worked so hard to destroy their future with the EV1, the same GM also went bankrupt a few years later. You know, the timing or the thinking of GM at the time was toxic. Fortunately, today it's a very different GM. In 2005, Linda Nichols and her husband Howard both drove Toyota RAV4 EVs. His was purchased new, but hers was leased. Except for the color, the cars were identical. But Linda's car was slated for destruction at the end of the lease with no option to purchase it. Linda and a group of others started the Don't Crush movement. They parodied Toyota's Moving Forward campaign with a Moving Backward campaign, and thanks to their effort, Toyota stopped the destruction of some of their leased EVs. And it's estimated that somewhere between 200 to 220 of the RAV4s were saved. There were nearly 5,000 fully capable EVs manufactured during the MOA era. Please note that with the exception of 101 of the RAV4 EVs, all EVs were lease-only vehicles with no option to purchase them. You know, and oddly, while GM was determined to crush the EV1s after the leases ended, there were about 60 of the S10 electrics that were sold, which essentially were the same drivetrain as the EV1 that GM did allow to be sold when their leases ended. You know, while a few EVs were put in museums and donated to universities after being disabled, a few of those got out, but the vast majority of them were retrieved and destroyed. But thanks to a passionate community, hundreds of these vehicles were used on the road for years. So after the MOA, it was a dark time, but there were 5 major reasons that made the current era of the modern EV possible. One was the Federal Clean Air Act of 1970 that gave California, the country's largest and smoggiest market, the authority to set its own separate and stricter than federal emissions regulations. 2 was a small but passionate EV community that stood up and fought for these underdog vehicles, ultimately forming a group to educate a lobby for EVs, Plug in America, back in August of 2005. I apologize in advance because I know I'm omitting many people, but at least each one of these tireless warriors need to be recognized for their role in pioneering advocacy for electric cars. Each one of them and so many others were heroes during this MOA era and beyond. And the OEVA continues that work today, what they started, and we started. And there was this documentary, the movie that changed everything. On June 28, 2006, Who Killed the Electric Car was released nationwide into theaters, later on DVD, now streaming. It is written and directed by Chris Payne, a former EV1 driver, and it inspired tens of thousands of people to write to Congress to demand EVs in the mid-2000s and re-inspire the industry to move forward. And I give Chris and this movie tremendous credit for where we are today. If you have not watched it, it's worth a few dollars to stream it, but at low quality you can actually find it from archive.org. It's really it does a great job of telling that portion of the story. Entrepreneurs. And I'm going to focus on 2 of the most important entrepreneurial ventures that occurred during the post-MOA era. AC Propulsion, founded in 1992 by Alan Cocconi, Wally Rappel, and Paul Carosa. They specialize in alternating current-based drivetrain systems for electric cars. AC motors and their controllers are what make the modern electric vehicle possible. Tom Gage became CEO of AC Propulsion and was involved in creating the TZero, the E-Box, and many other vehicles. Tom Hanks, seen here in his custom-painted RAV4 EV, became a primary investor in AC Propulsion and took delivery of the very first E-Box in 2008. Lithium-ion powered versions of the TZero demonstrated what was possible. And here's a video that talks about the incredible TZero from nearly 23 years ago.
Hi, I'm Tom Gage, president of AC Propulsion.
I'm Alan Cocconi, the original founder of AC Propulsion.
We'd like to show you a couple of cars we've built.
So this is the TZero. We designed it to show the ultimate performance that's available with electric vehicle technology.
TZero is an engineering term. T for time, zero indicating the beginning of a new time sequence. So for Tom and Alan, TZero represents the start of a new beginning.
So it's very different from a gas-powered car. If you put the big V8 with the supercharger in there, it's going to really be lousy around town when you're just going to the grocery store. While the TZero, that's not the case. It's one of the most efficient electric cars around in terms of energy use per mile, and yet it'll outperform Ferraris and Lamborghinis on a drag strip. This is one of the lithium-ion battery cells we're using to power the TZero. Now, this is not a very large battery, so obviously we have to assemble it into larger modules. Most car batteries you're used to are made out of a bunch of small plates put in one big box, and we basically take 68 of these and assemble them to one big block. So you end up with a module that's about the size of a normal car battery. And we have 100 of these 68 cell blocks in the car, which is a total of 6,800 cells, 3,400 each side of the car.
With nearly 350 pounds of batteries housed on either side of the car, the TZero has an optimum weight balance needed for sports cars and handling corners at top speed. Recharging those batteries only takes 3 hours and lasts 300 miles. This is what an electric motor looks like before it's mounted in the vehicle. Instead of shifting gears and multiple moving parts, all of which cause wear and tear, this has one drive shaft spinning at a max of 13,000 RPMs. So simple, you can spin it with your finger. Most impressive, however, is how the batteries can charge themselves through everyday driving.
One difference that's immediately apparent when you drive this car relative to a normal internal combustion vehicle is that when you let off the throttle, the car slows down in a very smooth, controlled manner, which means you don't have to use the brakes in normal driving. And in fact, you use all the energy from the motion of the car to recharge the batteries a bit every time you slow down, which helps to increase your range, probably up to 40% for city driving.
You're up to 60 in about 3.6 seconds, and your head snapped back. I've even had a feeling of almost not blacking out, but just a little disorientation from the acceleration.
So I think the name TZero was very prophetic, as it did start a new time sequence for the modern EV. It was not only the first EV to not only exceed 200 miles, but 300 miles of driving. And it was the first supercar performance EV. AC Propulsion's TZero and the end of the MOA inspired Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning to start a new company and create a mass-produced electric sports car. They founded Tesla in 2003 without Elon Musk. The TZero was the most influential vehicle that inspired the creation of the Tesla Roadster and set the stage for Elon Musk to participate in the first round of funding in February of 2004. These are some of the just brilliant minds that made this this movement possible. Again, apologies for leaving out so many people, as each of their accomplishments is contributed here, but I need to make special mention of Alan Cocconi, the person you just saw in that last video. Seen on the left on the center image, he's now a retired engineer, and he is, in my opinion, the single most important person who enabled the modern electric movement to begin. Because of Alan's effort, he is the inventor of the control electronics that were used in the Sunraycer, the GM Impact, the GM EV1, and the TZero, and made everything else possible. So charging standards, mentioned that a little bit earlier. Charging standards, aka J1772, was agreed to back in 2001 as the standard. In 2008, a new connector was established that could deliver higher power level 2 and supported charging up to 80 amps. That's essentially what we call today the J-plug, or J1772. But it's DC fast charging that's the game changer that enables EVs to go for long distance driving. Unfortunately, the DC charging standards were not established until 2011, after cars started appearing on the roads with both types of fast chargers connectors. That's why we have CCS1 and Chemoto charging stations still in North America. And this is long before the Tesla supercharging, aka NACS, or North American Charging Standard, or J3400, that we're transitioning to currently, but that's a topic really for a different presentation. Fortunately, both CCS1 and the Tesla standard are interchangeable with an adapter. The manufacturers started developing EVs again partly due to domestic demand for electric vehicles, partially due to Tesla developing the incredible Tesla Roadster, and partially due to the reaction of seeing other companies in other countries which were now starting to lead the way. Thankfully, GM reversed course and developed and promoted the first modern plug-in vehicle, the Chevy Volt range extended EV, and Nissan created the Leaf as the first mass production EV. Wait, but breaking news? What could be possibly breaking news in a presentation on history? Well, on October 31st, 2025, an original GM EV1, VIN number 212, was purchased legally at an auction at an Atlanta, Georgia impound lot after being considered to be an abandoned vehicle after it was damaged at Clark Atlanta University in storage. VIN 212 is the only EV1 that is now legally and privately owned. So Billy Caruso purchased it, and him and his incredible team is in the process of meticulously restoring the EV1, and they expect to have it fully operational by November 14th, in this year, as a celebration of the 30th anniversary for when the first EV1 was delivered to a customer, and they have posted the entire process on YouTube. After the car was purchased, GM started paying attention. Instead of what GM did in the past, where they were trying to destroy the cars, GM is not only supportive of the restoration project, they actually made last month, he authorized a team of people to scavenge an old EV1 from a donor vehicle, all the parts that Billy needed for the car, and they sent a crate full of irreplaceable parts, like a replacement windshield, and all sorts of things that were damaged on the V212, so Billy can get the car on the road fully functional as a fully functional EV1. So please consider supporting the program on Patreon. So I had to update my chart. So now there's one. There's one EV1 that was purchased. Two, not legally. Not legally. I said a few got out, not legally. This one is actually legally owned. It is. He has a insurance card for it, and
if they got a different attitude now, they could certainly make it.
They could, but right now, what I'm saying is there's only one legally owned vehicle out there.
So GM's helping with the restoration.
GM has contributed to the restoration of that project, including the incredibly rare brake control system that when GM disabled these cars and donated them to universities and museums, they took key components, they cut wires, they did certain things that they just disabled these cars. GM has donated those parts from a donor car to the V212 project, and it's pretty incredible. So do watch the YouTube videos. They're long, but they're kind of interesting, but especially the ones that came out in beginning of last month or mid last month, where they went to GM headquarters. It's a very different GM, and I'm really excited about it. So it's not the end of the story, and it's not the whole story, but it is the end of my presentation. So happy to answer any questions.
Watch the videos for
The V212.
We're going to find out.
YouTube. Just look up V212 on YouTube. It'll take you to their channel. It's called the Questionable Garage, and they have incredible. They've stripped it down to nothing. I mean, they literally stripped the entire vehicle down to zero, and they did a full body treatment to remove any corrosion that was on the car, and they're building it back up, but they've been documenting the process. And GM now, we weren't sure at the beginning if they were going to be helpful or not. They sent a very ominous letter at the very beginning. We weren't sure if they were going to be like, that's our car, you can't have it, because there was actually a contract with the university. When the car was at the university, there was a deal that they could never sell it, and they could never give it to anyone. So what happened? The car got damaged. It was put outside because the building collapsed. It was put outside. The front windshield was broken, and one of the windows was broken. And the car sat outside, and then somebody said, "There's this old car with a broken windshield," and they called the police, and the police looked up the VIN number and said, "That's not a real car. It's nothing on the road today." And they impounded it, put it to an impound lot. It sat on the impound lot, and while it was sitting on the impound lot, it had to be there for 30 days, and they had to advertise to say, anyone owns this car, they got to speak up now. Nobody spoke up, and Billy, and it went into this insane bidding war, It sold for over $100,000, but it was actually purchased, and it's legal, and it's a contract based on Georgia law. And GM, like I said, GM could have been a jerk about it, but instead of being difficult the way they have been, they've actually been very supportive. And I'm really thrilled that GM has changed their attitude from where they were in the past. So,
I'm wondering to what extent the Ovonics patent for nickel cadmium.
Nickel metal hydride. Yeah.
Yeah, nickel. Yeah,
Yeah.
Nickel metal hydride. I'm wondering to what extent that actually accelerated lithium technology and is responsible for us having high range vehicles.
Oh, it did.
Because had they been able to make that an affordable patent lease,
Right.
or whatever you call it, then I don't think there would have been such a push to go lithium, and we wouldn't have the long range.
I think you're right. There was investigations into lithium, and as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the Nissan Ultra EV was based on lithium-ion batteries. So they had that technology back in the late 90s, but it was very experimental. And I agree with you. The fact that GM sold their patents, Ovonics sold their patents to Chevron Texaco, and Texaco went to Panasonic, who built the batteries for my car, and said, "You're not allowed to build anymore. That's it." And so they ended production on the batteries, and that essentially ended production on everything else. So it's it's a long, complicated story, but
Why the Prius has such a small capacity.
that's right. But all these things have a cumulative impact, and that's why I said that it's not a simple this caused that. It's many different things, but this era, things that happened between 1987 and 2011 really set the stage for where we are today with practical long-range electric vehicles that have better charging infrastructure, they'll enable road trips that just work the way they're supposed to. But the old tech works. I mean, I have our RAV out there, and it's great, and you're 1920, not with old battery tech, but I mean, it's amazing the technology that's in, this is not a new concept for cars today. This is a very well proven concept. So, any other questions? Oh, thank you very much.